Hey everybody, we have another fun TLN webinar here starting today. Today we're here to start with I'll Take Management for 500, a really fun game that we're going to be playing. And with us we have Steve Bowers, our Executive Director at TLN, and Cathy Russ, the Library Director over at West Bloomfield Township Public Library. And I'll let them take it away.
Thanks, DJ. I'm going to share my screen. But for everybody that's here today, if you have your mobile phones, go ahead and get that out so you can play the game. All right.
And while you're doing that, I'll just say hi, everybody. I'm Cathy. I'm the director at West Bloomfield Library. I've been here for about 4.5 years. Prior to that, I was director at Troy for about 13 years, and I've been a library director for 25 years, which is surprising when I say that out loud. So hopefully, Steve and I can give you some tips on how to make your lives a little easier today when it comes to decision making.
All right. And a warning to everybody, some of these screens flash. So if that's a problem for you, know now that that's happening.
Not
Okay.
like strobe flashing. It's just
Yeah,
the
just a
screen
little flashing.
changing.
This is our retro video game. So,
Yes.
all right. So we're going to play I'll Take Management for $500. Cathy said who she is, right? So I'm Steve. I'm the director here at the Library Network. And we're going to play a fun game together. If you have questions, jot them down and we'll take them at the end.
So, or you can put them in the chat as we go, but we won't do the answering of the questions until the end. So you're welcome to hold your questions till the end or put them in as we go, whatever's easiest for you.
All right, here's our disclaimer. Any similarity of scenarios to actual events is purely coincidental.
I
So we're
guess I
not,
should mention too, Steve and I presented this session at the MLA conference in October of 2024. We did it for a live audience, which was fun. And I think well received. This is our first time doing this via Zoom and for an online presence. So we'll be interested in your
yeah,
feedback.
cross our finger.
That's right.
Okay. Why are we here? All right. Well, Cathy and I have talked over the years about different ways that people ask questions of groups. And she and I were talking over a year ago now, like, how do we help guide people of where to find the right answer for the question they're looking for? So Cathy's going to run us through this slide here, and then we'll take turns going back and forth about questions in the game.
Yeah, so why are we here? Well, Steve and I are here so we can do this presentation and we want to help. You're here, I think, because you want to play a fun game and you want to make your lives easier by honing your decision-making skills. So that's what we want to do. We want to give you tips for making decisions easier. In any position in the library, in your life, you have decisions to make. And sometimes it's not clear cut on what you do and where you go and to whom you ask. So we want to help you with that. We also want to help you build some coping skills. Being a manager isn't easy. And even if you're not a manager, but you're here, you may be a manager at some point. But as I said, we all have to make decisions and it's not easy. And it especially isn't easy if you think that the weight of the world is resting on whatever decision you make. And we want to help take that pressure off to provide support. You are not alone. We're all in it together. And I hope that you see, what the people on this meeting, certainly Steve, myself, and DJ, we are here to help. So you're not alone. We also want to encourage your critical thinking skills. If you're confronted with a decision, you can put some thought into it and ask yourself some questions, kind of like do a little reference interview with yourself, the way you would with the patron on the desk, and answer your questions. And that will probably help direct you or give you some direction on which way to go. So we'll get into that. The point is, after all of this, is that, the saying is practice makes perfect. Well, nobody's perfect, but practice does help you get better at making decisions. So let's get started.
All right, game on. Ready, player one. Everybody grab your phone. All right, here's instructions on how to play. If you scan the QR code there, you should be able to pull up a website. And that is where all the questions and answers will appear throughout the game. So once you're there, you'll stay in the same spot. So we do have a little sample question for you if you want to try it out. So you can scan the QR code or visit that address there. Our first question to get us going is, how do you feel about being a manager and making decisions? So let's go take a look at our live answers here.
So you can see there's a word cloud. And so the big word is overwhelmed, and that's understandable, especially when you're feeling like you're in the deep end of the ocean or you don't have the information that you need in order to make that decision. For better or for worse, I hope it gives you comfort that your colleagues on this call feel the same, because look at how big that word is. So again, not alone. Some people feel good. That's great. Anxious, empowered, nervous, fearful, confident, nauseous. Yeah, that sometimes that doesn't go away. Stressed. So yes, I think that we'll be able to help.
All right. So we're going to start with level 1.
Okay, so here you are on level 1. So we're going to ask at each level, there's going to be a question. We're going to ask you the question, you're going to give some answers, and we're going to talk through it. So your first level is, what is the real question? What are you really asking? So I'm going to read this scenario. You can read it too. The head of adult services in your library has requested that a new full-time position be created to meet workload demands. This may or may not be a needed position, but you know there's no budget for this position. Not knowing where to start, you turn to Mish Leibel for input. So that's your scenario. That's what's going on. That's what you have been confronted with. But your question, which we want you to answer, is, what are you hoping to gain from asking Mish Leibel?
All right. Give everybody a moment to put your answers in. Take a look. This one was multiple choice.
Yes. So you're looking for feedback. Okay. You're looking for what somebody else would do. Nobody's looking for a decision. And some of you are looking for more email. Well,
somebody who's joking, right?
I hope so, because I can help you with that. We'll talk later, and I'll just send you a couple emails a day. How are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? What are you working on? So we're going to leave that one out. So for those of you who said feedback and you're looking to see what somebody else would do, okay, I'm glad to see that nobody is looking for a decision. So that's the good news. I am going to submit to you that when you send out a question to Mish Leibel, you are casting an extremely wide net. You may be looking for feedback, but so your scenario, your head of adult services wants a new position. So you're either in the director position, assistant director position, or in the position where the head of adult services is asking you for this. You are going to get responses from catalogers, from circ people, from children's librarians, from people who have just signed up for Mish Leibel because they too want more email in their inbox. Are those all people, valuable people in their jobs, able to really contribute something meaningful to your decision-making process? I'm going to say no. You're going to get easily 50 emails in your inbox. You're going to feel like, wow, I got some feedback. That gave me something to do, gave me something to think about. Are those people, though, from whom you should be taking advice? I'm going to say no. And let's go back to the scenario. The head of adult services wants a new position. It may or may not be a needed position, but you don't have the money in the budget. So you're looking for feedback, but what are you actually looking for feedback on? You're looking for feedback to tell the head of adult services that you can't do it right now because you don't have the money. So again, back to the concept of a reference interview. when a patron comes in and says, I need a book, I need to do a book report, or I need information about dogs. You ask questions, what kind of dog? And throughout a series of questions, you find out what they're really looking for is Snoopy, right? So do that to yourself. What are you looking for? And hone that down so you can then ask the right people. If you're looking for feedback, and there is nothing wrong with asking for feedback, nothing wrong with it at all. And I think 20% or whatever said they'd look to see what other people would do. There is nothing wrong with that. But figure out what you're really asking, because then you know where you should really ask it. Does that make sense to everybody?
So remember, our context was, what's the real question for that one? All right, we ready to level up? Our question for this level is, who are your real apples? Might not make sense, but we'll see. So here's our second scenario. Your board asks you to research salaries and pay raises in preparation for the forthcoming budget planning process. They are thinking of giving everyone a 5% raise this year. This is a real realistic scenario. I'll take a 5% raise. Okay, so we ready for our question? And if you're having trouble with the questions, you may have to hit refresh on your phone screen there. All right, so this is our question for this level. Where would you turn to first to find the information on salaries and pay increases?
And this one's multiple choice too, I think.
Yeah. No, this one is
Short answer.
yes, thank you. We have a variety on these. Short answer on this one. Okay, let's see what people are starting to put in. All right. Ooh, somebody gave the right answer. Okay, so you might look at the Library of Michigan spreadsheet that has comparative salary data. You might look at your salary structure at the library, the state library report, DSLRT survey on salaries and other information, Library of Michigan statistics webpage, salary spreadsheet, other libraries. Okay, lots of good answers here. So first, I want to say yay for all the people that said there's some data out there that the state and other libraries provide. One thing you want to keep in mind, though, like the Library of Michigan data, the DSLRT data, if you're going to look at salaries and the rates, make sure you use comparable libraries when you're looking at information. So don't compare your class 3 library to a class 6 library, or somebody might question that data. Plus, they should be questioning it because they don't always align with each other. But you may have to look at different size libraries if you have to compare. If you're surrounded by a different class library, you still may have to look at their data somewhat, because you might have to explain to your board that you're not able to hire anyone unless you have a competitive wage. So lots of good answers on this one. Keep in mind, though, looking at who your apples are. So that means comparing apples to apples. So you don't want to compare your library and your data to another library that's not necessarily relevant to what you're looking at. I'm glad no one said to ask a listserv for this information.
Yes, I've frightened you all about Mich Leibel. Good.
So,
And I guess just to tag into that, you can extrapolate this question to anything, not just salaries. One of my very favorites, maybe not so much these days, but I remember, in the past, 5-10 years ago, people would send out to Mich Leibel, how much do you charge for copies? How much do you charge for color copies? And I'm in West Bloomfield. So I'm going to check what my neighboring libraries, Commerce, Bloomfield Township, Waterford, Farmington, probably, where might my patrons go in order to make a copy. I'm going to find out what the libraries around me are doing. I'm not going to send it out to Mich Leibel, and I'm not going to send it out even to the entire TLN, because I don't care, and I don't mean this unkindly, but I don't really care what Traverse City's charging for copies. My patrons aren't driving to Traverse City. Maybe they're going to Commerce if they think they can save a nickel. So that's one example. So your apples may be different in different scenarios. With salaries, you're certainly going to want to check the same class and the same establishment. With copy prices, you might want to check, geography. Sometimes if it's a collection thing, a collection question, if you want to implement services to seniors, check with other libraries that have large senior populations. So you have to think about, again, to kind of go back to our previous question, what is your real question? Where's the best place to go? And who are the best people to ask? Whether it's in the same class library, the same, is it a township library? Is it a district library? Is it a department of the city? I had a call not too long ago from someone at a township library who wanted to know about benefits. And the first question I asked her, she said, I'm calling all the township libraries in Michigan. And I said, what class are you? And she said, a 3. And I said, you don't want to know what I have to say because you're a class 3 library. I'm a class 6 township library. I'm going to tell you how much we spend on benefits, and it's going to be more than your entire budget. And you're going to feel despair. So think about it. It's not necessarily township to township. It's classic, I think we've made the point, but so you have to that's where the critical thinking comes in. What's your real question? Where should you ask it, and to whom?
Yeah. And Cathy mentioned library establishment type too. Maybe not everybody on the webinar today knows what that is, but in Michigan, there's multiple ways to become a public library. And each of those legal ways to be a public library has different rules of how you operate, including, do you have contracts for your employment? Do you have unions? And do you have rules for setting salaries for those different things? So there's all kinds of questions, and we want to make sure you compare apples to apples when you're doing that. Even DSLRT, if you don't know what that is, that's the Detroit Suburban Library Roundtable, and they have a listserv. I might email the listserv and say, does anybody have the DSLRT survey? But I probably wouldn't post this question to the list because not everybody on that list is going to have comparable data for what I'm looking for. And you can remember too, when you're replying, if somebody does post a question to a list, they're just asking because they need some input. So you can kindly give them directions in your answer if you reply to them. You might not have the answer to the question they want, but you might be able to guide them of where they may look to find the best answer. Okay. So back to our game here.
All right. Congratulations. You've made it to level 3. Oh, this is my favorite question of all time. What could possibly go wrong? Another question to ask yourself when making decisions. So here's your scenario. Library staff has been asking for a library pet. You realize that some people are allergic to dogs and cats, but what about a guinea pig or a domestic rat, or fill in your animal of choice? What could possibly go wrong with that? So here is your question. What should you consider when making a decision about whether or not to get a pet to live at the library?
All right, and this one is back to multiple choice, because we want to give you our specific examples that came up in a real scenario. So let's see what people are putting.
So your choices are things to think about when making a decision about whether or not to get a pet for the library. There's nothing to think about. Pets are so cute and they will add a lot to the library. The use of taxpayer dollars to pay for food, shelter, and healthcare for a pet. What if the pet gets loose or dies? Who takes care of the pet when the library is closed or the designated staff member is on vacation? Answers B, C, and D should all be considered. Oh, yay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who answered E, I appreciate you. And for the people who answered B, I appreciate you too. That tells me you live in a particular type of community. Um, and that's very important because there are, I think, especially these days, people who would, if you opted to get any kind of a pet, would want to know how that pet was being paid for and how come my tax dollars are being used to pay for that gerbil, that sort of thing. So, but if you've been around for more than maybe 3 months, you know that this topic comes around on Mish Leibel, on TLN, on anywhere you go on a regular basis. And I'm just going to be very blunt with you that it surprises me every single time because there is so much to consider. And I appreciate that people look for feedback, but I think this is very much one of those questions that if you stop and think about it for 2 seconds before you turn to your keyboard and shoot that out into the wide world, you will answer your own question. I don't want to give the impression that you shouldn't get a pet. That's an individual library decision, but there is an awful lot to think about, and you do need to consider the repercussions. So, if Timmy the rat dies and nobody on staff catches it, and the little kid who comes in and says, Timmy, how come Timmy's not moving? And then Timmy's traumatized forever, or the child is traumatized because Timmy's gone, or Timmy the rat gets loose. And instead of reporting it to you, a patron reports it to the local paper. And then the headline is rat infestation at the blah, blah, blah library, which you will not live down for 5 years. Those are all things. It's like you have to kind of choose your own adventure on these things. It's like, what if this, what if this, what if this? And if the scale is tipped in favor of like chaos and disaster, don't do it. Just don't. It's okay. You can say no. If you go, oh, but they're so cute. But disaster. Don't choose
And
disaster.
your library may decide to get a pet, but notice how we framed the question. We didn't say, should we get a pet? We said, what should we consider when making this decision? And that's a much broader and inclusive question to try to say, what is everything I need to be thinking about before I say, yes, we can get a cat, or whatever decision you might be making.
And then this ties into the planning process, because if you do get a pet, you should have a schedule of who's taking care of the pet. What happens to Timmy when the library is closed for 3 days for the Memorial holiday? Does Timmy go home with somebody, or does Timmy, stay there and we hope for the best? And if Timmy gets sick, who's taking Timmy to the vet? So if and when something happens, there's a plan in place so you can deal with it.
Okay. We're going to level up again. Who are your resources? What friends do you have to call? Oops, sorry about that. All right, so scenario number 4, based on responses to your community survey and other requests from the public, the library is considering creating a space for neurodivergent people who may be overstimulated and need a break at the library. So our question, and this one's open-ended short answer. What should you consider when designing this area? And who do you ask for answers? It's kind of 2 questions here.
But you get to fill in. So what do you consider and who do you ask?
So answer one or both of those questions.
So this is your opportunity. Now we're asking you a question, so you are putting those critical thinking skills to use.
Steve, I haven't seen the new survey pop up.
Oh. What do you mean?
There we go.
I was giving everybody time to think on that.
I could respond. Here's what I'd say.
Okay. Who certifies this type of space? Do they have guidelines? Ask other people who work, professionals that work with this group of people, the community it's designed for, ask them what they would be looking for. Also consider your space and your budget. Consider the needs of the community and look into different libraries who have spaces like this to get ideas. Culture City or another organization. I'm missing some of these. The space and the budget. Ask the people and the population we're trying to serve. Where would it be located? Is there guidelines to enter the space? Do you have policies on who can use the space? Is it a closed space? So lots of different good ideas. So again, on this one, we're framing the question, what's everything we should think about when we're designing this? And who might we ask for answers?
I have to say, I appreciate the answers to this question very much. They're all good. And I would say that they all apply. I mean, there's no one right answer. And in fact, you are going to be looking, you are going to be considering several things, and you're probably going to be asking different people or for feedback. The population that you're serving, you're going to be asking libraries that have implemented this sort of space. You're going to be talking to experts in this area. But you're also looking at your policies. You're probably going to have to create a policy, or at least some sort of guidelines for use of this area. You're going to have to look at your budget, of course, to see, how much money do we have to design this kind of space? Where are we going to put it? What space will we use? So you can see that when you have a decision, some decisions are pretty straightforward, but I dare say that those are not the decisions that are causing people to feel overwhelmed or stressed. The straightforward ones, or the ones where there's, do I want to have Mexican food tonight or Italian? The world is not riding on the answer to that decision, but it's some of these large things. So it helps if you can, break it down, make lists, or however you keep track of things. But by determining who you should talk to and what you should consider, by figuring that out, you're eliminating a lot of people you don't have to talk to and things you don't have to consider. So you can focus in on what you actually need to do and who you actually need to talk to. So you're kind of just clearing out the clutter and focusing on the important stuff. All right, level 5, timing is everything. Okay, here's your scenario. The upcoming holiday falls on the weekend, and you are not sure if you should close another day during the week to accommodate for this holiday. That is your scenario. Your question, though, is when should you set holiday closure dates for your library? And this is multiple choice. When should you set holiday closure dates for your library? If you are not in the position to make this decision at your library, think about it anyway, because someone in your library is making this decision. And you might be a person who may be asking a question, are we closed on July 5th? Or why don't we close on July 5th or July 3rd? So you'll be kind of walking in their shoes for a moment. All right, so you can set closures a year in advance. You can set it as they happen, a month before the holiday itself, or 3 to 6 months before the new year. Once again, props to everybody who answered this question. I so appreciate that no one chose B or C, because as you know, if you've been around for more than 3 months, you see that especially around 4th of July, things pop up about being closed July 3rd or July 5th. That seems to be a popular one. I usually around June 21st kind of gear up for it. And I'm always surprised because we set holiday closures in advance so the public knows that they can rely on us, that we don't just close at the drop of a hat, and we don't just close because people wanted to stay out late and watch fireworks. The public relies on us for consistency, and they rely on us to be there. They don't mind if we close, but they want to know when we're closed. And you want to have a consistent, reliable schedule. So when do you set that? I would say that A is a good answer. I think D is a good answer too. It's what works best for your library. My library's fiscal year begins April 1st, but obviously we, like everybody else, start our new year in January. I usually bring the holiday closure list to the board in September, October. So a couple months in advance. That gives us a chance to make sure we've accommodated for things like elections if we're an early voting site. So in case we need to do anything around there. Sometimes if you do a year in advance and things come up, people might be afraid to make changes. Don't be afraid. You just don't want to set it too far in advance. So if something comes up, you feel like you can't pivot to adjust. So the 3 to 6 months works well for us, but the point is make it work for you, but don't do it any less than 3 to 6 months in advance, because then you run the risk of seeming arbitrary to your public. So Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and arbitrary to your staff too. People need to plan their schedules. So, this was specific question, when should you set holiday closure dates? But a broader question you could ask too is, what should be in our policy that guides how we set closure dates for the library, whether it's holiday closures or emergency closures or other types of closures. So don't forget, there should be some sort of guide, a policy, to let you know when and how to set these types of, or make these types of decisions. And if whether it's you or someone else at the library that is making these types of decisions, if there isn't a policy, it can be a good idea to consider creating a policy to guide this type of decision making.
I think a good example is Juneteenth. 5 years ago, libraries weren't closed for Juneteenth, and now you see many libraries are. But the decision to close on that date was not made on June 18th, or like, oh, we should do this, And then if the library is closed on Juneteenth one year, it would be closed Juneteenth the next year, the next year, the next year, or not for whatever reason. I think Steve's got a great point about policy and consistency, so the staff knows. But I've seen, just so you know, I've seen too many emails about how many libraries are closed again, end of June. How many libraries are closed for July 5th? My staff want us to be closed July 5th because they're out late for the fireworks the night before. And to me, that's one of those questions. If a member of the public came and said to me, why are you closed on July 5th? My answer should not be because my staff's out late the night before watching fireworks. What kind of impression does that convey to your public? Not a really great one. So, you have to think about those kinds of things when you're determining closures. Emergency closures are obviously emergencies. If the boiler's broken, the air conditioner's out, whatever, you have to, so the public understands and can deal with that. But if it's just sort of like a seemingly random day or a holiday adjacent day, you need to have a better rationale for your closures, and that's where your policy comes in.
Yeah. And, we're talking about decision making, so we're talking about policies, but something like a closure, especially emergency closure, you're going to have both policies and hopefully written procedure as well. So you have guidance for making the decision, but also guidance for how to play out the decision that was made.
And probably a communications plan as far as to how to communicate that decision. You let the public know that the library is closed today because it's 90 degrees and we don't have air conditioning, for your health and safety.
Right. Okay.
All right.
You guys are doing great.
Yeah. So now we're in the bonus round. Woohoo.
All right. What do you do when someone comes to you as the resource and you don't know the answer to their question? This one is open answer again. Find someone else that does know the answer. Redirect them to somebody else. I'll get back to you. Let me check. I say, I don't know, but I will do some research and get back to you. Find somebody that can help. Redirect, take down info and get back to them. Okay. You're all experts at answering this because it's kind of like that reference question we talked about at the beginning. Use my research skills. Try to find another source. Okay. Yeah. So, we're libraries. Hopefully we just say, don't know. Next.
So one of the things with this question is that you can apply that to decision making. If it's an emergency and you have to make a decision in the moment, are we going to close because the boiler's broken or the air conditioner's broken or, whatever the emergency situation. Obviously, time is a factor and you have to make that decision. If you have some time before your decision, take the time. Take the time. And if you don't know, you go find your experts. If you don't know, do your research, look at all the different factors that are involved. Who are the best people to talk to? Where's the best place to go for that information? And if somebody wants that decision out of you, have a sense of the time in which they need it and say, you know what, I don't know, right? Or I'll have to think about that. Or I'll have to do some research. I don't know, but I'll find out. Some people are not comfortable with saying they don't know, and that's an individual decision. At this point in my life, it's so natural to me because I'm happy to tell all of you, you could fill an ocean with what I don't know. And I'm okay with that. I don't want to know everything. It's too much for my head. I'm getting older. But I will find out. I will find out and I'll get back to you on your deadline and I will learn something along the way. If you're not comfortable saying you don't know, there are all of those other things. Let me research that and I'll get back to you. That's a great question. I need to talk to some people about that. That's a great question. You might get a better answer from so-and-so, whatever it is you need to say. But you can take the time to research whatever this question might be. No, and you might have to make it a priority because maybe they need it by the end of the day or the end of the hour. But you usually have some time unless it's just that much of an emergency. So take the time and don't and be comfortable with whatever version of I don't know, but I'll find out works for you.
All right, we're going to do a bit of review from our questions today. So this is kind of like a framework you can use when you're faced with making a decision at the library or in other scenarios. But what's the real question that you're trying to answer? Not just like, I need an answer to this now. Who are your apples? Or, can you compare to similar settings, similar scenarios, similar library types, so that you're trying to hone in on an answer that best matches your setting in particular. What could possibly go wrong? So in our pet scenario,
the pet scenario is the best thing to think about when what could possibly go wrong.
Yes, that's Cathy's favorite, right? Who are your resources? Do you have individuals as you're building your little toolkit of people that you always want to catch up with that you might ask the question for? Oops, sorry. Or do you have a list of resources you're like, when this topic comes up, I'm going to contact this person. So it's okay to build your own little toolkit of who your personal resources are. You're on different lists or in different groups, which one might be appropriate for the question you're looking for, or which individuals should you contact? And then when should you make a decision or start planning for a project or decision that you have to make? So all of those are good. Who, what, where, when, why.
If I can just go back to what's the real question. So I think one of the things you have to ask yourself with that is, are you looking, because to hark back to that question that we asked, and the multiple choice answers, are you looking for feedback or are you looking for a decision? Sometimes people say they want to hear what other people did, but you have to be careful if, that old saying, if everybody jumped off the bridge, would you jump too? If feedback, again, you cast that wide net, you're going to get a wide net of answers. If you're looking for what other people would do, you're heading down decision road. You still have to apply your critical thinking skills because, if you ask a question and 7 people said they did this and 3 people said they did that, are you going to go with the 7 just because it's 7 instead of 3? You still have to say, well, what works the best for my library? And if you are looking for a decision, then I would suggest to you that you keep that network small and talk to people in your similar situation and people that you can trust, and not send it out to the larger world. Because if you're in a position where decision making is a big part of your job, and you put out on a regular basis decision making type questions to, say, Mish Leibel, I'm just going to be blunt, you're kind of telling the whole world you don't know what you're doing. If you phrase it in a certain way. Now, if you phrase it, I'm just looking for feedback, or wondering for those of you, and you can say things like, for those of you who have implemented a neurodivergent space in your library, how did you do it? Because that's narrowing the field. Now, you're probably still going to get some people who have never done this, and they're going to answer you if you cast the net on Mish Leibel. But frame your questions so you get the responses from the people who have experience with what you're looking for. Does that, I hope that makes sense to everybody, kind of
Sure.
went around a little bit, but you can frame the way you ask these questions to get the answers that you really need and the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah, be more specific. And we're not saying don't ask questions. And
No,
don't
not
be
for 1
afraid
minute.
to ask questions because you think you might look silly. But you're not going to look silly if you thought through it and ask a more specific question that lets people know what you're really asking. So kind of do, again, that reference interview with yourself before you ask the final question.
A more specific question, and I would say to a more specific audience.
Yeah.
And then going down to who are your resources. Don't underestimate the power of networking. If you know people in similar jobs to you, if you're a teen librarian and you have like a cadre of fellow teen librarians, wonderful people to bounce things off of, because they're in it with you. They might be in different libraries, but you're all, doing the same thing, similar experiences. I have library directors that I've known for years, that I will go to them and go, hey, this is what's going on. And, have you ever had that? And they will do that with me. So, a group of people that you can trust, so you can bounce off scenarios to them, or situations. And that's where, feedback, and that will help you come to that decision with people who are in the same boat as you.
And even for your resources, like if you're the director, you'll know, is this a question I should ask my whole board for input? Is this a question, I trust this particular board member to give me the right input on this answer, on this question? So, a single board member might be a resource. The board as a whole might be a resource. Or you might be finding out a question that you need to take back to them the answer. So then you're not going to ask the board. So you just have to look at the context of your question and the scenario you're dealing with, and think through it before you start asking people for input. Think through it yourself. All right. Dun, 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 dun.
Yay,
You
you
won.
win.
So we
Old
changed
school
it to
video
practice
games.
makes perfect, but it just, you get better as you go. So I want everybody to answer the last question we have. Single word, how do you feel now about decision making? You can still say trepidation. All right. So people are feeling a little bit better. You could still be nervous. You could still be whatever. But hopefully we just give you a bit different framework to think about when you're faced with making a decision.
And I will say, I mean, and I mean this to be encouraging, but I've been a director for 25 years, and scenarios still come my way that I think, what? Or really?
Right.
Or oh my. And you just you can't know every single thing or how to react in every situation. There's just far too many situations, coming at us, especially these days. But the tips that we've given you today are things that have helped me, because I started, 25 years ago. I was not, I couldn't have taught this class. I overwhelmed, unsure, scared out of my mind. I had a couple of situations in my first job that had some egg on my face. And I thought, oh, I'm never gonna live this down. But that's how you learn too. And these are things that have helped me over time. So now I can be here and hopefully share these tips to help you. So you will get there. You really will. And I think based on your answers, you are there. You have good instincts. You have good instincts, and nobody gave wrong answers. So congratulate yourselves for that, and I hope that helps your confidence, and I hope it helps you feel like, okay, when these things come my way, I don't have to know everything. I just need to know where to go. So yay for you.
And even DJ will tell you, I've been in management for almost 30 years. It's been a while. Even some days I feel overwhelmed. So again, that's knowing your audience and knowing who are your people that you trust. Because sometimes you have to go to others and say, I really don't know how to make this decision, or this decision is overwhelming me. So it's not just answers you're looking for from others that are part of your group that you trust, but you're looking for support. You're looking for that input, and you're looking for encouragement if you need encouragement. They're probably facing something too that they don't want to have to deal with. But you can all do it together, and you still won the game. So,
All right. So questions.
all right. Hay preguntas? Any questions?
So if you have questions, feel free. You can drop them
I
in the chat.
I know that I saw some going in the chat.
Yeah.
I think along the lines of the holiday closures.
That's it. So the question, and there were some comments regarding it too. Good Friday being an issue, having in the past being closed but now being open. Some patrons being thankful for that. And sometimes holiday closures, you just have to justify the decisions with staff, or potentially having to work with the unions too if you have a union library, so that way it's less of a choice. So yeah, you guys can comment on that first.
I
But
have
yeah, if you
actually,
have other comments, drop them in the
yeah,
chat.
I have an example that I can give. So West Bloomfield Library has always been open for Martin Luther King Day because we do programming. The schools are closed, but it is very much a place where the community comes and celebrates that holiday. And we do a lot for that. So a couple of years ago, when more libraries were closing for Juneteenth, I truly did not know what to do for Juneteenth, because on the one hand, we were open, and we are open for Martin Luther King Day, and we are in a diverse community. But more than anything, what I wanted was to be respectful. Is it more respectful to close, or is it more respectful to be open? And I didn't know, and I did not feel like it would be responsible of me to make that decision on my own. And so we have in West Bloomfield a diversity task force. So I went to them and I said, I need your help. This is the situation. We want to be respectful. If the library stayed open, we would want to do programming. We want to have the library be a place where, again, people could come and celebrate the holiday. But if it is more respectful to be closed on that day, then that's what we should do. So I asked the diversity task force, and a member of the diversity task force was a member of the Black Parent Network at the schools. And she did a poll for me and asked the community via the schools, via the Black Parent Network, via some of her other channels, and said, the library wants to know what the community thinks about this. And resoundingly, the community responded that they wanted the library to be open. So the library is open. So when staff members or other members of the community have questioned why the library is open on Juneteenth, that's what I tell them. Because it wasn't my decision, Cathy Russ's decision. That's what I told the board. Now, if that ever changed, or sentiment seemed to go in the other direction, we would honor that, we would respect that, and we would be closed. But the point is, I didn't feel comfortable making that decision on my own. I went to my resources and I got I enlisted their help. They gave me feedback. I think together we made the decision, and now I have things that I can communicate when people ask about that decision. So that's an example that I can use. Good Friday, I think, is I know some libraries are closed. I know some libraries are open, and I think that's where the knowledge of your community and what it wants. And again, back to that idea of respect.
I
And,
think
and I think if you frame it that way, you're just trying to do the best you can. And hopefully people will understand that. But sometimes you have to go outside of your organization and ask for feedback.
And so two things that Cathy said to point out again, you can make a decision and you might have to change it later, maybe not. But the second thing was you have to communicate. Why was that decision made? You may have to communicate before you make the decision. We need input from our constituents on this question. Juneteenth is a great example because libraries don't know which way, and depending on your community, her community made one decision, may be different for your community. And you may have different constituents for different holidays in particular. Juneteenth, Cathy, the library is serving the public. It was a little different for TLN here for Juneteenth because, we're serving all the libraries, but we also have employees that we're serving. So we had to ask different questions around that. And we did specifically have to look at the Good Friday question. And at one point we made the decision, we were getting rid of basically all religious holidays other than Christmas, because we consider that kind of secular. But so we had to communicate and have conversation with our unions and with our employees. And even though our different holiday decisions were made, they come up sometimes each year, and we have to re-communicate to people why we made the decisions that we made. We got rid of Good Friday, but we have 2 floating holidays for anyone of any religion to use for different religious holidays that they might want off. But there's a lot to go into it. And again, it depends on your community and your library setting in particular.
I saw a comment come in from Jocelyn about, are there any holidays that, the community, and it cut off. But so I'll give you a flip example. So the community wanted us to be open Juneteenth. So we are. We added a second in-service day. So we have an in-service day in November. So we're closed for staff training. We added one in May because we were packing so much into that one in-service day. There's no way you can get a year's worth of, because there's safety training, there's staff development, there's, deep diving on some issues. So our May in-service day is we focus on safety, and November we focus on more of the staff development kind of things. So May we can do active shooter training, we can do CPR, AED, Narcan, those kinds of things. There has not been a peep from the community. They're very happy. I mean, nobody's called me and said, we're so happy you're doing this. But the point is, I have an answer. We are doing safety training. So because we're open so many hours, we're open 7 days a week. Once a year, we need to do fire drills, tornado drills, active shooter drills, all of that stuff. And then we also need to do staff development. So we've made the decision. We didn't pick the busiest times of year to close. We didn't pick the busiest days of the week to close. We picked the days that were slower. So if anybody came and said, how come you're closed on Friday, May 16th? I would say, well, we're doing staff safety training that day. It's not a holiday, but we're closed because it's important and we need to. And because by us learning these things, we are helping to keep you safe when you are in our building, and we're helping to keep each other safe too. Yes, they can still argue with it, but that's the answer. And so that's the flip side of the coin, in my opinion. The point is, folks, if you have a well thought out answer and a rationale, hold to it, go with it.
I think that's so true. Uh, we've got maybe a couple minutes left. If you have any last minute questions, I saw there was a more of a comment. I'm kind of getting into how class size may not always be the best as far as comparison, but I think we talked a little bit about that. What other resources too would we lean into when comparing pay rates if you're posting a job posting?
So, and I think, yeah, I think there's all kinds, I think back to that topic, you have to look at what your question is and then determine who your apples to apples comparisons are. So if it's salaries, yeah, class size, but union, not union. Who's in charge of making those decisions? If you're in a union environment, it's going to be probably more structured and laid out in the contract. It's, I think also it, like communities. I'm in West Bloomfield Township. I'm very fortunate. This is an affluent community. So when I have questions on certain topics, who am I going to talk to? I'm going to talk to Bloomfield Township, my neighbor to the east. I might talk to Grosse Pointe. I might talk to, I don't know, the libraries with similar budgets to mine, but um, I'm also going to look at those budgets. Southfield Library has a bigger budget than West Bloomfield, but so much of their budget goes to building maintenance because they have that beautiful 3-story building. They are also a department of the city, and I believe they're a union. So Southfield is not a place. So they're a class 6, we're a class 6. Am I going to go to them for everything? No, because it may not apply. So I think when you think about who to talk to, you absolutely have to look at what you're talking to them about. Um, so back to the salary question, resources, the Library of Michigan spreadsheet, you can finesse that so you can limit to class sizes. DSLRT salary survey is really a good one. But I would start out too by looking at who is around you. Who is around you that is like you. And that, like again, back to my example before, even with salaries, Traverse City might be a class 6 library. Am I going to do I care what Traverse City is paying people? Not so much. I mean, it might be of interest, but my staff's not leaving to go to work at Traverse City. Who am I competing with?
Yeah.
That's what I would look at. I don't know if that is a specific
Sure.
answer to your question, DJ, as far as like a resource or a manual or whatever, but those
Well,
are
and
the
I,
thoughts
I
that go
see the
through my head.
question here in the chat, and part of it is like you might even be having to compare within your city if you're a city library. What are other departments paying? What are their classifications for the city and the pay rates for those? And certainly, as the comment says in the chat, if you're class 3, but you're in a more affluent area, but you just have a smaller population, then you don't want to compare to other class 3s in a rural
Right.
setting. So you have to look at all those factors. Class size can be one of them. Budget size can be another. Population size, location,
I
all the
think
different
community
community
demographics.
demographic. Yeah. And again, the type of library establishment. And if you're the newer type of library is a district library and that has totally different rules, and you have a district agreement with the participating communities for a district library, and that may guide some of those decisions as well.
West Bloomfield is a township library, but we have 3 contract communities. Rochester has some contract communities. I'm trying to think of who else does. So we're not a district library. So Baldwin has some contract communities. So if a question comes up about contract communities, who am I going to go to? I'm going to go to libraries that have contract communities. Not really going to go to a district library because it's a different situation.
Yeah. And Melissa here in the chat mentions looking at circulation. Class size again is not always the measurement. Or even specific item types. If you're doing DVDs, you're going to talk to other libraries that are doing DVDs.
Right.
If you're looking for questions about that, or if you're
Senior
trying to
services.
decide, yeah.
The other thing too, honestly, especially when it comes to things like materials challenges, comparable communities, like I think Livingston County directors probably talk regularly because they might be facing similar um, materials challenges or controversies from their public that I am not in my corner of Oakland County. So what is the issue and who else is in your boat? And it's going to be a different boat depending on the issue or the question, I guess I should say.
Yeah, so hopefully the takeaway is there's all kinds of factors and try to think through, which pieces to this puzzle are going to best fit for my
Mhm.
puzzle that I'm creating. So that was stupid, but
Speaking of fit, though, we have fit all that we can in this amount of time. I appreciate you all. If you do need to follow up, of course, feel free and reach out to Kathy or Steve if you have more questions. But enjoy the rest of your day and join us for more webinars in the future.
Thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
thanks. Bye.